Good morning, one and all. How was your weekend? Hope you're all fit and well. I'm going to say good morning again to my old mate Eve Canessa, who's watching over on Instagram. Haven't seen him in many a long year. Gary Muirhead saying, "Good morning, all you romantic people. Did you enjoy Valentine's weekend with your loved ones?" I did actually. Yeah, we went out for a spot of lunch and us on our own, which is somewhat unusual in this house. We're normally accompanied, so yeah, we managed to duck the children this time. Children, they're in their 30s, but we managed to duck everyone else and went off and had a nice time meal. So yeah, had a fantastic time. Dan says, I've got a mate struggling to find himself having family issues. Get some help, mate. Whoever that is, Dan, point him in the right direction. Point him at construction sport or somebody like that. And send them my best. Let me go right back to the very beginning because Dan was here at 9:55 this morning, closely followed by Andy Thornton, but bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning, 9:57. Good morning to you, Andy. Jim Turner is here somewhere. I've seen him. Where did he go? There he is. He's saying morning peeps. That was where he was. And Andy Dalville may be here. I haven't spotted him yet. But yes, he had a very successful pantomime over the weekend, apparently. Good morning, Andy. It's behind you. Behind you. Yeah. Oh, no, he didn't. Oh, yes, he did. Yeah, absolutely. I'm working on something. I don't know how comfortable you lot are with being on video. I had an idea over the weekend. I mean, I can't say it's an original idea. I saw it on another sort of area of the interwebs, but I thought, oh, that would be interesting. You know, Mount Rushmore over in America. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's got the images of 4 presidents carved into it, who are presumably the most iconic, the most memorable, the most important presidents in American history. I was wondering, in fact, I'm going to film my own. I don't know if I'll get around to doing it today, but I'm going to film my own. I may even do it while I'm in the States to give you plenty of heads up. But I was wondering about doing a series, and it will be your series. Well, I'll broadcast it on my channel, so it gets plenty of exposure. But I was wondering about doing a Mount Rushmore of plant. Not necessarily the biggest selling, not necessarily the one that you bought first. Well, it could be the one you bought first, but 4 items of equipment from the history of plant and equipment that you believe would be representative of the industry on a Mount Rushmore of plant. What would you put on there? Now, as I say, I'd quite like to do this in video format. I can do the first one to set the ball rolling. Whether we'll get anybody else to take it up, but I do wonder. I do wonder, because I reckon it would differ from place to place, person to person, preference to preference. Is anyone up for that? Would anyone stare at a camera lens for a minute, ideally less than a minute actually, and just list off the machines that they believe belong on a Mount Rushmore of plant and equipment? Please let me know. Dan says, yes, that sounds good. Well, Dan, give it some thought. Turn your camera around and do it that way, would you? That's horizontal, not vertical. Horizontal. Stare into the camera and say, my Mount Rushmore plant would be, if you want to add a little bit about why, you can do that as well. We'll work on that in the background while we're doing all the other things that we always do. He says JCB would be one. I'm just to be clear, I'm looking for specific machines. I mean, I've already worked out what mine would be. I'm not going to tell you now because I want to do the job properly. But let me just say that there will be a JCB machine in my top 4, my Mount Rushmore. Hold that thought because we've got another packed show, as always, including a bit of a surprise guest appearance that I knew nothing about. Genuinely knew nothing about. So let's do this, shall we? Good morning to Mick Norton and to Mark Whiting, who have just crept in while I was looking the other way. But good morning to you, gentlemen. It is Monday, the 16th of February, which means that in 2 weeks' time, I won't be here. I'll be in Las Vegas. Welcome to the Breakfast Show. I am your host, Mark Anthony, the Walrus of Demolition, the Lord High Chancellor of live streaming, which is where I'm supposed to do that, and the authentic voice of the global demolition industry. Yeah, very quickly. You know, I had a bit of a rant last week. Yeah, the fallout continues. And I'm pleasantly surprised at how positive the fallout has been. In today's show, Volvo goes compact with its latest excavator, crushing it with Magna. Gravis Robotics keeps men out of harm's way, and our MB Crusher sponsored Countdown Connect. Let me do that with my teeth in. And our MB Crusher sponsored Countdown to Conexpo series continues with XCMG, which has its own theme tune, which is pretty impressive, and it has a special guest too. I'll tell you more about that when we get there. Plus, in today's edition of Mark's Morning Monologue, just say no. And there are drug references in it, but that's not what it's about. So stick around if you'd like to find out more. What's going on over in the chat here? Jonathan Duras says, morning, been a while. Jonathan, I was on the verge of sending out a search party. I was getting genuinely concerned about your absence, but welcome back. Dan says, they got back to you. No, they didn't get back to me, but lots and lots of people have dropped me a line and said, you're right. Yeah. What we got here? Yeah, talking about our Mount Rushmore of plant. Funnily enough, and I understand exactly where you're coming from on that, Gary. That's not in mine. There's one very similar, but it's not that one. I'll bore you with it. I will try to record it today because I think it would be a good thing for you lot to have a bit of a think about while I'm in Vegas, maybe. Ken Hatter is here as well. Ken, you just missed me talking about this. We're talking about I'll come back to you in a second, Gary. Ken, we're just talking about a Mount Rushmore of equipment. What would be your choice of the four most iconic, to you, not necessarily to the entire industry, but what would you, if you had a Mount Rushmore, we're going to take off Lincoln and Washington and the other two, and we're going to replace them with items of plant on that cliff face, what items of equipment would you go for? Gary says this, have you started to make plans for the 10th anniversary? This is Didcot, which is this time next week. Gary, yes. So, the weekend, we got away with it on Saturday, so we managed to get out for lunch and had a bit of a stroll around, and it was all very pleasant. But Sunday was an absolute deluge here in Surrey, which meant I had nothing to do but to sit down in front of a computer. So I have written my thing for this time next week, the 10th anniversary of the Didcot disaster. We're going to dedicate the entire show to it, strip out all the videos, strip out all the transitions, strip out all the arsing about, and we're just going to do that. But yes, I've written my thing. I'm going to pre-record it because Didcot tends to upset me a little, and I tend to go a little bit kind of off track. So I'm going to pre-record it. I'm going to try and do that today, actually. But yeah, we are ready to roll as far as Didcot is concerned. Ken says, I'm on the 1 tonner today and I'm freezing. Trouble is, you scale down a machine, you scale down the heater. Yeah. But yeah, keep moving and keep warm. Incidentally, very, very quickly, I do want to say this because our morning monologues are normally a bit ranty, a bit angry, a bit cheesed off about something or other. Tomorrow's is going to be educational, I would hope. If you are on a machine for any length of time, I would urge you to watch tomorrow because we're going to be talking about something that Well, basically, you're suffering the effects of your machine and probably not even realizing it. We'll come back to that tomorrow. Let me tidy my screen up, get rid of this old nonsense, and let's hit this. Yeah, from one big name to another. We are going from Caterpillar hammers to compact Volvo excavators that look like this. Gary says, I wonder if that's a replacement for the ECR 88 and 88 Plus. I think it is. I'm not sure, but I think it is. Ken Hatch is saying, should be a good tool, that Volvo. Going back to tomorrow's show, tomorrow's morning monologue, we'll be talking about whole body vibration, or WBV. I think most of us are probably familiar with the whole notion of hand-arm vibration, or HAVS, HAVS, hand-arm vibration syndrome, or Raynaud's disease. My wife's got Raynaud's disease in one of her fingers. Goes completely numb from time to time. I think we're all familiar with that. But this is the effect on your whole body, or more specifically on your spine. Yeah, I think there is a temptation to think if you've been sat in the same position for hours on end, that feeling in your back is, oh, I've just been sat down too long, or maybe this seat isn't quite comfortable enough. It could be something much, much more serious. Stick around for tomorrow. I'll be bringing that for you. Ken Hatcher, I think I already know about the effects on my body. I wonder if you're aware of the potential cause. As I say, I think there's a temptation to just brush it off as, oh, well, I've been sat down too long, or this seat's a bit too hard, this seat's a bit too soft, or this machine isn't particularly comfortable. Turns out the vibration going up through the floor, up through your seat and into your spine is potentially doing you some proper harm. Good morning to Sergio Santos, all the way from Brazil. Bom dia, my friend. Bom dia. Yes, good morning to you. Dan says, I hear you. I often wonder why they don't put lorry-style seats in machines that move multi-directional with the operator and put air cab suspension. I think we've got some fairly fancy seats. So, yeah, there are some fancy seats available. Whether anyone actually buys them or whether your boss has ever bought one, that's a different matter, because they do carry an additional cost. But yes, Gary says, we often brush it off an old age. We're starting to feel our age. It could be something else. Ken says, tell me about it. I was in hospital on a stretcher with my back years ago. Yeah, I wonder if that's what it was. And Dan saying, no, seats aren't that comfortable in machines for operators. As I say, I mean, when you look at what's available, If you go to one of the websites, I think Volvo does this. Was it Volvo or Liebherr, where you can actually spec your own machine online? And it comes with a regular seat. There's a better one. There's an even better one. There's an even better one than that. And then there's a really good one. How many people have ever actually parted with the cash for that really, really good one, I wonder? Gary says, Dan, you should see the opera cab from Hydromec. Wow, that's the way it should be. I agree 100%. JCB has done a lot with the X Series cab and seat. My Kubota seat is dreadful, he says. Dan saying for the price of the machines. Yeah, that's the problem. That's the problem. If you want, and I'm not even sure I would describe this as luxury. I'm talking about something that's comfortable. If you want to be spending 8, 9, 10 hours a day in there, 5 and 6 days a week, 225 days a year for the next 5 years, is it really too much to ask to have a bit of support? I wonder. Anyway, should we crack on, because we're going crushing in a second.
If you are enjoying this episode, please consider supporting the show. You can leave us a tip at buymeacoffee.com/demolition news.
Yeah, we don't feature crushers very often, but when we do, they look like this. Yeah, smart crusher, as Dan Cullen said. He said that's a tidy crusher. Dan also says he's actually talking to LC International about a day out on their machines. I hope that they do Sunward and they also do Hydromec. I hope you get some time on a Hydromec, particularly if it's one with an opera cab, because they are very, very special indeed. Ken Hatcher on the subject of cabs. The bounce in the backhoe sorted my back out. 25 years on it. Excavators are much more comfortable. Yes, I agree 100%. Gary, on the subject of comfortable excavators, I must admit this seat in this Cat, I think that's the Cat 352, is amazing, very comfortable, heating and cooling features, as it should be. If you were working in an office, you wouldn't be sat on a wooden bench, would you? You'd want a nice, comfy seat. That's why I have my gamer chair. It might look ridiculous behind a 60-year-old bloke, but it's dead comfortable for long periods of time, which is precisely why I bought it. We're talking remote control in a moment, but not in the usual way. Have a look at this first, and I'll introduce what's coming up.
Since the finance bill came into effect in April, the construction industry has seen a surge of fuel thefts. The rising cost of living has placed an additional risk of theft by employees and contractors, as well as opportunistic thieves. By using diesel dye and placing warnings of its use, you are sending a clear message that this is your fuel.
Now, a couple of things on the video I'm about to show you. First of all, I understand everyone's kind of suspicion over remote controls, autonomy, simulation, and all that kind of thing. I do think, however, there are certain applications where it would make sense in a nuclear power station, maybe a particularly dangerous or hazardous demolition project. So that's kind of what we're focused on with this. But also pay close attention to the actual simulator itself, because it does something that I've not seen a simulator do before. You'll pick it up straight away. Have a look at this. Pretty smart, right? Now, that does lead into another thing. On Wednesday this week, don't forget, Wednesday evening, 7 o'clock, we're doing a breakfast show after dark with the fine folks at CM Labs. That was Gravis Robotics. That's not theirs, but their system is not dissimilar to that. So if you're interested in that kind of thing, please be here, 7 p.m. UK time on Wednesday of this week. Now, let me go back a touch. Jim says, the worst thing about the modern seats is the metal bars and seat adjusters stick out too far and I bang the back of my legs on them. Yep. Yeah, and I've also got a nasty habit of clouting either my knee or my hip as I sit down in some seats. You know, where you got that, not the raisy armrest, the other one. I have a nasty habit of getting in the cab, clouting my knee or clouting my hip as I sit down on those. Khaled is here. Hello, diggers and dozers. Good morning to you. Gary Muirhead says, I think if you actually calculate how long you're sitting down in a day, it's probably longer than you're standing. So it'll probably be no good for your back or your health too. Well, listen, I get out of bed. I come down and I sit down and I prep the show. I do the show and then I go and stroll about a bit and I come back and I sit down again. I am sat in this seat for 8 hours a day, 9 hours a day, maybe, sometimes more. Probably be more today because I'm going to be doing the recording of some various bits and pieces. Not good. Not good. I mean, even setting aside, I mean, I don't get whole body vibration, but when you think about things like deep vein thrombosis and that kind of thing, and just basic inactivity, you know, I lead a very lazy lifestyle, basically. Ken Hatcher says, I'm getting a bit of tingling in my hands and feet now. It's not good. people. It's not good at all. Going back to that simulator, wow, it spins. Yes, it does spin. I don't know if that serves any purpose. I mean, I think you could represent that on a screen. You can show the panning movement, but I do think it would give you a better feel. I do think it would give you a better feel. And that notion of having operator safe distance away while the work is being done. As I say, if you're working in an environment where there's toxins, maybe nuclear waste or whatever it might be, a demolition, maybe a demolition after an earthquake or a partial collapse, where you want to get up close and personal, but you don't want to put people in harm's way. I think that's an absolute cracking bit of technology. I really do. Wow, that's interesting, but be very weird. I wonder how long it would be weird. I wonder how long it would be before you thought, oh, actually, this feels, but because I mean, with me, it's cars. When I hire a car, the first 10 minutes you're in a new car, you think, oh, Christ, this feels weird. But after half an hour, it's like, this is second nature. A lot of you guys switch machines. Dan, you in particular, you go from site to site, machine to machine. I wonder how long that would feel weird, or before your brain just went, nah, it's okay. I'm fully immersed in this now. I wonder. All that wants now is 360-degree cameras over the operator. Well, I'm sure that could be done. I can never hold the levers. I find you can feel the machine and you rely too much on your wrists. I'm sure they would allow for your fingertip control. Jonathan Duras, that's pretty cool, if I'm honest. I think so too. Yeah, I think so too. I don't believe it's for every application, but as I say, when you've got something where you really don't want to put man or woman in harm's way, I think that's a fantastic bit of kit. Gary says, I remember a doctor telling me about my weight and asked when I eat. And I said, I was on the railway at 4 a.m., which I'm not good because your body should be sleeping and burning food. Yeah. You should actually stand up every hour or 30 seconds. I think that means 30 minutes, actually. No, every hour for 30 seconds. My apologies. My Apple Watch tells me to stand. I've got an Apple Watch. I'm not wearing it at the moment. I've got an Apple Watch. And that is one of the bugbears I have. It does have that function, and I do think that's worthwhile. I don't always listen to it, but every hour it tells you to stand up and move around. What annoys me with it is when I've got my phone, which is linked to my Apple Watch, and I'm driving and I'm using the Apple navigation system, Apple Maps or whatever it's called, and my watch and my phone both know that I'm driving, and my watch vibrates to say, stand up. While I'm driving? Or do you expect me to pull over on the M1 and stretch my legs? That's not how the world works. Dan says that's too true, Gary. Actually sitting more than getting physical. When I used to cycle to work, I loved it. Yeah. Ken Hatcher says I could put that in my living room. See, I do wonder about that. I mean, that's quite an imposition on your living room. But you imagine, I've seen some of these where they come in a kind of a deliverable pod, about the size of a telephone kiosk, only slightly less tall. You imagine being able to put one of those in your back garden and you can work remotely for UK companies, but you could also work for Australian companies, American companies, New Zealand companies, all from your back garden. Yeah. We're going back to the cycling. With exercise before work, exercise after, and slept better. I used to cycle up to 120 miles a day between Ware and Cambridge, Chelmsford, London, and Surrey. 120 miles a day. Good Lord, man. It only feels weird when you think about it. I think a lot of the other things an operator are on autopilot. Yeah. Yeah. Just open your door and get out. Yes, just to please my watch. I'm definitely going to do that at 85 miles an hour. I don't drive at 85 miles an hour. Sorry, officer. I misspoke. I was doing 69.9 miles per hour. When I have some me time at night in my digs, my Apple Watch thinks I'm playing tennis. Some me time. Well done. Incidentally, very, very quickly, I heard something over the weekend. there's lots of podcasts, video podcasts, where they get people to phone in with weird nicknames that they've come across. Like somebody with a particularly big head was known as the sniper's dream. Somebody with a very heavy limp was known as the sniper's nightmare. You get the idea. Somebody had written into, I think it was the Peter Crouch podcast, and said that for years that there was an aunt who was referred to by all and sundry as Auntie Clit. Clit. Yes, as in clit. Turns out the reason she was called Auntie Clit was because her name, get this, her real name was Joy Button. Yeah, all true. My other half is watching, and she's not very well at the moment. All send your best wishes. Poor love. Got a bit of a cold. Didn't stop her stuffing her face on Saturday, I will had, but yeah. Don't fight the chimp. It just wants to play. Don't overanalyze things. Don't fight the chimp. Never heard that before, but I like it. Okay, I think we're pretty much up to date there. Let's do a bit of this. Right, so we're doing our countdown to ConExpo, which is now just a couple of weeks away. So I'm constantly scouring YouTube and I'm being sent videos, but I'm constantly on the lookout for new videos showing what we're likely to see when we get to ConExpo. And I happened upon one from the mighty XCMG. I'm delighted to say we're going to be working with XCMG this time, not for the first time. They have a new video out that shows, a bit of a preview of their stand at ConExpo 2026, most of which comes from ConExpo 2023. Two things about this video. The first is, if you listen very carefully, they've actually got their own theme tune that mentions XCMG and Las Vegas and all that. And if you watch, maybe 30 seconds in, you might spot somebody you recognize.
Yeah. XCMG, from Vegas to the world. You see the yellow, you see the power. Let's work. Las Vegas lights, XCMG in a zone. Smart system, live data on its own. All on its own. Steady on the rise, field tested, proven. Solid.
North America's largest construction trade show is going on right now, and earlier I caught up with a Chinese company that's paving the way with international and North American development.
Runs the flow smooth, precise, clean. Solid XCMG. Built smart for North America scene. Vegas to the world. XCMG in control. Smart tech working system by system. Las Vegas lights. XCMG.
We have a growth plan with XCMG that we're working to achieve. But
at XCMG, we're fairly new to the United States. So this is where we plan to make our big splash.
Very welcoming, as XCMG always is. Some fantastic new products on the stand as well.
I have a compactor, a spike roller of y'all, and so far we absolutely love it.
Interested in many little excavators?
We came here to see the XCMG machines and visit with everybody and see other machines too.
XCMG at ConExpo, solid to succeed.
Building the dream North America. We here, field tested, proven XCMG.
I realise it's 3 years ago, but I have no recollection of recording that at all. None whatsoever. None at all. Gary saying get well soon to my other half. Jim going back to his chimp. Operating the machine, having fun. My inner self is in my headspace, thinking deeper and solving problems and dreaming up new ideas. I'm off to wrestle a chimp later myself. Please don't ever anybody clip that and put that out, because that sounds really weird. Dan saying, "Wow, good catchy tune." I'm sure what they've done is precisely as lots of other people are doing these days, just punch a few details into ChatGPT and saying, "Yeah, turn that into a song, why don't you?" And that's what it did. Yeah. Gary says you've got a very impressive lineup of major manufacturers that you'll be working with in Las Vegas. Well done and congratulations. I actually have, if you bear with me for a second, do I have it to hand? Yeah, I can tell you. As it stands today, we're still talking to a couple more. But we will be working directly with Encon, Kinsoffer, Topcon, XCMG, Xspanner, Wacker Neuson, Power Bully, CM Labs, Oilquick, Exodus Global, and MB Crusher. Yeah, we've got all of those on the agenda, so keep an eye out for all of that. Mrs. Anthony, stay rested. Get Mark to attend to you. Stop that. Don't give her ideas. You need a bedside bell. She doesn't need a bedside bell. She's got one of these. Just text me and says, "I need coffee." You know how texts work in that voice. Yeah, you get the idea. Right. It is that time. What time is it? Oh, I hear you ask. It is this time. Bear with me 1 second. That's about it for the main part of this morning show. I'm going to roll the outro in just a second before leaping gazelle-like over into my morning monologue. If you can't stick around for that, please stay safe. Look after yourself, your family, your friends, and your colleagues. Hope to see you again very soon. I'll be back tomorrow. But if you do have the time and the inclination, I will be back immediately after this with what, for some of us, will be a bit of a trip down memory lane. It's got very little bearing on the actual monologue itself, but you'll see. Back after this. Back in 1986, the children's TV programme Grange Hill confronted the issue of drug abuse and addiction in an uncharacteristically serious and hard-hitting manner. One of the key characters, Zammo, was shown spiralling into heroin addiction, which was really groundbreaking at the time. Those few episodes spawned an anti-drugs campaign in which children were urged to just say no. In turn, the campaign gave rise to a chart-topping song that was also called Just Say No. And even though Grange Hill was a quintessentially English TV show, the anti-drugs message spread, with members of the cast invited to the US to meet the First Lady, Nancy Reagan, who had actually coined the phrase in the first place. Just Say No went global. 40 years later, the combined UK demolition and construction industry would do well to reclaim that phrase and that defiance. Not as part of an anti-drugs campaign, although that would be a good idea too, but to belatedly take a stand against the countless additional demands placed upon them by government, clients, and main contractors. Think about it. Some bright spark decided that we needed a pre-qualification questionnaire just to get on a tender list. That was an additional imposition, but we let it slide. Many of the major contractors then decided they each needed their own specific PQQ, and if you wanted to work for them, you had no option but to comply. In the end, there were so many different PQQs that a number of companies sprang up to provide a one-size-fits-all PQQ that subcontractors had to pay for. The system is now so complex and so bloated that some companies employ people purely to handle PQQs. As an industry, we stood idly by while the powers that be decided that anyone working at site level would require a competence card, which would cost money. And to get that competence card, the individual would need to sit a test or an exam, which would cost money. To retain that card, they'd need to sit refresher courses and tests, which would cost money. If their role required them to do a slightly different job and they needed another card, and they'd need another test, which would cost money. Most people said nothing because they knew their competence status was safe. They were granted a card under grandfather rights, so they said nothing. And then their grandfather rights were removed. And this isn't just about individual workers. Companies were encouraged to join the Considerate Constructors Scheme or to gain accreditation via CHAS or Construction Line, all of which are a further drain on a firm's bottom line. For decades, those working in the field of demolition and construction benefited from the red diesel subsidy until the government decided to remove that subsidy. The industry had plenty of time, more than 2 years, to unite and fight. Instead, it spent that 2 years staring at its shoes, hoping the government might change its mind. The government didn't, and industry fuel costs rocketed. For years, we've seen companies winning contracts at an agreed price, but before work can even begin, they're required to value engineer to make additional savings. In any other walk of life, that would be seen as a breach of contract. In construction, it's just the latest in a long line of impositions that have gone unchallenged. We've seen main contractors, some of the biggest and richest firms in the sector, openly boast about pushing out their payment terms from 30 to 60 and 60 to 90 days. And no one batted an eyelid. We've seen major firms insist upon additional 10% across the board discounts from all the firms in their supply chain. And that supply chain nodded obediently and complied. Most recently, we've seen the industry forced to adopt social value into their contracts. Firms already drowning in paperwork now have additional forms to fill out, assuring everyone that they will try to employ local people, that they'll try to safeguard the environment, and they'll do their best not to breach modern slavery rules. This is just the tip of the iceberg. In fact, each time someone on high conjures a new initiative, the sector falls over itself to fall into line, even though it will shave yet more from the margins that are already transparently thin. Part of the issue, of course, is the industry's lack of unity. The majors are extremely adept at securing compliance from one subcontractor at a time. And even when those subcontractors do huddle together for warmth within a trade association, they've aligned themselves with a small silo that barely has more influence than they do. And that association will charge them to be a member, and that association will impose yet another set of rules of their own. And those rules and regulations will keep on changing so that you keep on paying. It's not that we've lost the ability to say no, it's worse than that. We've lost the ability to pause for a moment, to consider the advantages and disadvantages of each new imposition, and to then give a considered answer, which in many cases should be a categorical, unequivocal, irrefutable, absolutely not. So the next time someone says they have a new scheme, a new campaign, or a new initiative to improve the demolition and construction industry, be like Zamo, be like the cast of Grange Hill, hell, be like Nancy Reagan. Just say no. Let's see. I mean, this industry has some very good writers and stuff, but who else would combine drug abuse, Grange Hill, and PQQs? Very few, I would say. I remember when they brought out the pencils for kids at school, saying don't do drugs, totally oblivious to the fact that when you sharpen the pencil enough, the word don't would disappear. Brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Andy says, I've got a great scheme, Mark. I'm sure you have. All joking aside, and I know you are taking the mickey a little bit. Here's the thing, right? So if somebody gets in touch with me and says, I have a cunning plan, in the words of Blackadder. I'm reading Ben Elton's biography at the moment, so Blackadder is front of mind. I have a cunning plan. My default as a person, as a human being, as a business person, and everything else, my default answer is, what's in it for me? And if what's in it for me is additional cost, additional work, additional hassle, additional bureaucracy, then having considered it for 2.5 seconds, my answer is, I'll pass, thanks. I already have enough of whatever it is that you're trying to sell me. I want no part in it. And yet, the industry just. I mean, I've written quite a bit about social value recently. I've referred to it as a social value shakedown. You know, I'd like to think that most companies in this country would, you know, largely do some good anyway, or in this industry would largely do some good. So if you happen to be working at a school and the school says, you know, while you're here, is there any chance you could give a lick of paint to that fence? I think the chances are you probably go, yeah, we'll get one of the lads on that. We'll slap a bit of paint on that. That'd be fine, not a problem at all. Because you know we're doing £1 million worth of work, 40 quid for a tin of paint and half an hour, not a big deal. I think we would do that. I'd like to think that most companies in this industry are not going out actively seeking to employ modern slaves. I think we generally accept that we don't particularly like paying them much, but we're quite okay about paying people. I think we've got that into our heads. I think we've got into our heads the idea of, you know, apprenticeships are by and large a good thing. I think we've got into our heads that training are a good thing. I also think that to a degree we've got into our heads that if we're working a long way away from our usual base and we can employ temporarily or otherwise some local people to help with that project, that's a good thing, and so on. I think we understand that. So do we really need this whole social value movement whereby you basically have to make up stories? If you read the article, it's over on Demolition Insider. You've now got contracts being won not on the aptitude of the demolition contractor, not on their capability as a demolition contractor, not on their experience or their knowledge. They're being won on their marketing department telling a really good story about their commitment to social value issues. As part of our employment within this contract, we guarantee that we will pay all of our people more than minimum wage. We should do that anyway. As part of our commitment to this contract, I promise, I vow on my honor that we will not employ slave labor. You're not supposed to. This is not hard. This is not new. This is not original. These are things that you're supposed to be doing. But that is now wrapped up into social value. I am going to go over to here. Gary Muirhead says, if Rick Mayall's character, Lord Flashheart, is in your book, thought he was hilarious. Yeah. You know, it's quite funny, actually. I've read back to back, and I've got a third one on the go. Or that I'll be starting soon. I read Nigel Planer's, for those of you that remember Neil from The Young Ones. Oh no. I read his book, which is called Young Once, not Young Ones, but Young Once. Enjoyed it that much that I then got the Ben Elton one. And it's very interesting. I think they're very, very different people, but Nigel Planer's comes across as very warm and I can't believe I was lucky enough to do these things. Whereas Ben Elton, there's kind of an underlying bitterness to it. Not a big fan of Alexei Sayle, for one thing. I mean, I was never a big fan of Alexei Sayle, but yeah, very, very open. And you know, he was supposed to play. For those of you that were old enough to remember, he was down to play Mike, the fourth member of the Young Ones, and then there was a change of heart, and Rick Mayall basically said to him, "You're not doing it. Don't mention it ever again. We'll move on." And you can tell that still rankles with him 40 odd years on. So yeah, yep, it's down to marketing, mental health, wage, and timescale. Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. Dan says this industry is a joke at the moment. In my honest opinion, no one sticks up for it. No, it doesn't. And I've tried with my piece on Didcot. I've tried to avoid criticism because what is the point? But I saw a thing talking about American politics and the ongoing machinations about the Epstein files. And somebody had put on Substack, I think the exact words were something like, if the nation can't unite over the protection of young girls against paedophiles, what could we unite behind? I think we've got the same with something like Didcot. 4 men died needlessly, unnecessarily, wholly avoidably. Should have been an opportunity for the industry to come together, whether they're members of the NFDC, the IDE, or no members, or members of nothing whatsoever, but to come together as one, as a united force, to demand change. And you'll hear it when I do it on Monday. But there are several things that I think the industry should have done by now and need to do going forward. And one of those is contesting the notion of an open-ended investigation. Nothing else about this industry is open-ended. Nobody says, you've won a contract to build a motorway. How long will it take? Oh, we'll finish it when we get around to it. Nobody does that. And yet when it comes to an accident investigation, that's precisely what happens. It just goes into a big investigative black hole and hopefully will emerge at some point in the future. That needs to stop. And if that can't be stopped, then we need to be given access to interim findings to allow us to mend our ways as an industry to make sure that it doesn't happen again. But all of that should have brought us together. Didcot should have brought the entire industry together to say Didcot was a turning point. It was an inflection point. Everything from now on, we will regard as pre-Didcot and post-Didcot. We should now be living in a post-Didcot world. We're not. And that's not been helped by the fact that it's 10 years almost to the day since it happened and we're still waiting for the findings. But as an industry, this idea of just sitting back and saying, oh, well, Thames Valley Police will get their findings one of these days, and the Health and Safety Executive will probably prosecute one of these days, and maybe we'll make some changes one of these days. Bullshit. Absolute bullshit. Unforgivable. Unforgivable to just sit on the sidelines and say nothing, which is precisely what the industry has done. All down to greed on a yes sir culture. Yeah. What I find weird though is I don't believe that greed is an exclusive to the upper echelons of the industry. I mean, for example, the CMA investigation. We're talking about we're pretty big contractors, but they're demolition subcontractors. They do demolition for other people, basically. So they are subcontractors. And I think the greed within that was writ large. I think we can all see that the greed flows down. So why is it that when somebody comes up with some grand plan, we're going to have a new competence card for breathing or walking on site or whatever it might be, that the industry doesn't go, oh, I'm not doing that. No, poke it. I'm not having anything to do with that. And we don't. What have we got? Funny how the world is fascinated about Epstein and his island, but the British rape gang inquiry is played down daily when the scale of abused people is far higher. Scale, possibly. Wider impact, probably not. When you've got members of the royal family and members of the presidential administration seemingly caught up in it, I think that's a bigger deal. It's not, one raped child is one too many. But I think when you think about what the wider implications could be, I don't want to go off sideways on this, but when you think about the way that Donald Trump has acted in reaction to Ukraine and Russia, favoring the Russians, who have traditionally been America's mortal enemy. Why? Do the Ruskies have something on him? And is there something they have on him out of Epstein Island? Instead, it's done nothing. Same, any accidents happening to date, all pushed to the side, and we'll get into it sometime. Yeah. And even the makeup of that, is, I think, is wrong. One of the things became very clear with Didcot. We'll talk about it more on Monday, but one of the things that became very clear about Didcot was, as soon as the dust had settled, within a couple of hours of the boiler house coming down, the health and safety executive basically threw a cordon around it. They took all of the guys that were digging by hand to try and recover their friends and colleagues, took them all off, and they put a cordon around it. Now, yes, I'm sure there was concerns about the other bit of the boiler station could collapse as well. There was concerns about getting into collapsed steel, and that could have collapsed further and claimed further lives. But the biggest fallout from all of that was that they were looking, from literally within hours of it coming down, they were eyeing the prosecution and the fine. What they should have been eyeing, well, first and foremost, recovering the 4 guys. Second, making sure that their families were cared for. And then, maybe third, make sure the industry knows exactly what happened so it doesn't happen again. And then fourth, if there is somebody to be held accountable, then we worry about the prosecution. But it was completely arse about face. From the moment that boiler house hit the ground, their focus 100% was on the prosecution. And the families, the industry, everything else has just been shoved to one side. I wonder if the NFTC will just copy and paste last year's statement, if there was one. I'm not even sure they did one, if I'm honest. Because, again, nobody has pointed the finger of blame at Coleman and Company. They were the demolition company that was doing the job. It happened on their watch. They are an NFTC member. So literally, going back to what I was saying about the HSE, from the moment that hit the ground, the NFTC basically circled the wagons, because they don't want to be seen to be criticising one of their own, much the same as they didn't want to be seen to criticise 10 of their own who were caught with their hand in the cookie jar. That's the NFTC way. Didcot is a problem of diffusion of responsibility and compassion fatigue. Yeah, it's all of those things. It's all of those things. And there's more to it than that. When you think about the makeup of our industry, a subcontractor is answerable to those above him, who is answerable to those above them, who is answerable to those above them, and so on down the line, or so on up the line, should I say. When it comes to an accident investigation, in this instance, primacy is with the Thames Valley Police. Thames Valley Police, go and do your thing. Who's policing that? Who's policing the police? Who watches the watchmen? Who is the Home Secretary, the current Home Secretary, whoever the fuck that is, are they even aware that Didcot happened, that the 10th anniversary is approaching, that Thames Valley Police have done basically nothing to bring that to a close? Are they aware of that? Or is that just another piece of paper on a desk that's entirely covered in bits of paper? Jim, Gary, going back to the British rape gangs. Very true, Jim. When they want to cover up something or take the heat off themselves, then old Jeffrey comes out of the closet. Well, yeah. I've got a funny feeling the Americans, or I say the Americans, I've got a funny feeling that the Trump administration now is using distractions to distract from the distractions that they had last week to distract from the other distraction. It's, I do think we're actually at the point now where, let's bomb Iran. Why are we bombing Iran? Well, because people are talking about Jeffrey Epstein. Okay, we've bombed Iran, but people are still talking about Jeffrey Epstein. Oh, we better kidnap the president of Venezuela then. Really? Yeah. Why are we doing that? Well, yeah, because of drugs. They're not doing drugs. We'll do it anyway. Bomb Nigeria. Why are we bombing Nigeria? Well, Nigeria is Nigerian. Yeah. Jim says, well, just proves people care far more about themselves and celebrities than the poor victims. Do you know, that is precisely the point. Never mind whether it was Epstein or gangs here in the UK, whoever, and Didcot. Let's not forget what Didcot actually was. It was an avoidable, unnecessary, fatal accident that killed 4 demolition people on a modern demolition site here in the UK. You know, we're trained to within an inch of our life. We're heavily regulated. We're audited. We have to go through so many hoops in order to get set foot on site, and yet having done all of that, 4 people lost their lives. The focus for the past 10 years should have been that, precisely that. What can we do to make the life of the bereaved families easier? We'll never make them better because they've lost a loved one, but what can we do to help them and to ensure that we never have this again, that no other family has to endure what those families have endured? And don't let's forget, when Didcot happened, and I was there the day after, I predicted, it was 2016, I predicted that we wouldn't get any findings until 2020. Well, I was 6 years wide of the mark. My concern now is that Didcot, not only has it been bloated and protracted and all the other things, is that will now be the precedent. Because nobody has held Thames Valley Police or the Health and Safety Executive to account. If there's a major fatality on a demolition or a construction site, I think the investigating authorities can now point to that and say, 10 years, that'll do. Maybe more. You know, they took 10 years over it, being paid and, you know, racking up costs and expenses that somebody will have to pay at some point in the time. That's the way to go. Compassion fatigue is what's happening with Russia and Ukraine. We stopped following as much as we did. It's the same 10 years after the Didcot disaster. Yeah, I first encountered that notion of compassion fatigue after Live Aid, which, you know, to somebody of my generation, 1985, I was 20 years old, still convinced that music could change the world. And what I wasn't prepared for was, like, 6 months, maybe a year later, there were, you know, TV campaigns, not necessarily about starving Africans, but, you know, it might have even been about sort of lame donkeys or mistreated dogs or whatever. And the level of compassion that was being shown had declined. And it was, Live Aid was blamed for that. You know, we'd basically given up all that we could, not just financially, but all that we could emotionally and spiritually, and we were now bereft of that level of compassion. I must admit, I was very defensive over Live Aid, partly because one of my musical idols was one of the driving forces behind it. But it does feel like it is a thing. It does feel like it's an actual thing. Gary says the NFTC are so money obsessed they don't want to cut off the hand that feeds them. Yeah. Listen, let's call a spade, because that's kind of what we do around these places. 10 of their members were found with their hands in the cookie jar. You'd think any right-minded organization would say, you're out. You're out until you can prove that you're worthy of coming back in. But the truth was, they looked at it. Not only were they all paying members, I mean, they're all paying members, but not only were they paying members, but some of them were the very companies that gave them some sort of credibility. McGee's, Keltbray, Erith, 3 of the biggest demolition contractors in the country. DSM, the most profitable demolition company in the UK. If we kick them out, not only do we lose their membership money, we greatly decrease our perceived reputation as an industry leader. We'll just be a gang of also-rans, while, you know, the really big boys are outside. That was the decision that was taken. It was cowardly, utterly cowardly. One of my biggest bugbears at the moment with this, with Didcot, with Redcar, with Long Gannet, with the CMA investigation, with all that's happening in America, all that's happening here, is that cowardice to stand up and say, this is wrong. You know, when you've got America building concentration camps and abducting their own citizens, shooting their own citizens in the street. The cowardice of politicians, the cowardice of the military, the cowardice of my lot, the media, to not call that out, I think is utterly, utterly disgraceful. And they've got to live with that. They've got to live with that for life. You know, Trump will be gone at one point. You know, I'm not going to go down the whole Nuremberg trials thing. But, you know, when the leader's gone, all of those that were complicit in his wrongdoing, they'll be held to account. I hope some of the press are equally treated, because the way that they've bent the knee to Donald Trump and continue to bend the knee, I think, to Nigel Farage over here, absolute disgrace. Andy says, it surprises me how many people don't understand the difference between responsibility and accountability. Yeah. Well, I wrote something recently. I cannot remember what it was called. It's going to test my brain. I'm sure I've got it here somewhere. Yeah, everyone's to blame, but no one is responsible. That's what I called it. It's a couple of weeks ago. And that is absolutely the case. Absolutely the case. And Dan Cullen saying, true. Jim saying, Live Aid, etc. was all done wrong. Too much corruption. They should have employed Western firms, people to help and educate them so they could look after themselves. I think that's quite an easy thing to say in hindsight. It's a bit like, and I tend to break down political things to a much, much smaller thing. If I'm walking, you know, if I, on the occasions that I pop into London and I pass a homeless guy begging on the street, temptation is just put my hand in my pocket, bung him a fiver, and hope that gets him a bite to eat, gets him a hot cup of coffee or whatever it might be. I don't actually think that's wrong. Now, yes, there will be those that argue that actually what he's done is he's stuck that in his pocket and he's using it to fuel the Porsche that he's got parked around the corner. Or he's going to save up until he's got 10 of those £5 notes and he's going to go and get himself a nice big bag of crack. My personal responsibility with that is, this guy looks like he's fallen on hard times. I've got a fiver in my pocket. It wouldn't be the end of the world. You know, if I were to lose it, I wouldn't necessarily lose sleep. Let him have the fiver and hope that he goes and buys himself a burger or a cup of coffee or whatever it might be. And I do genuinely think, you know, going back to Live Aid, and I've read and watched so much on Live Aid because it was such a defining point in my life. You know, it was at its heart Bob Geldof watching the telly, saw Michael Burke's report about starving Ethiopians, called up his wife and said, who's on the tube with you tonight? And she said, Ultravox, mid-yours here. Put him on the phone. We need to do something. We can't allow this to happen. Now, what happened after that, you know, was we are ultimately talking about a couple of musicians who had a good idea. And quite how that was handled beyond that, I don't think they should be held accountable for that. A show of hands, is the NFTC fit for purpose? Hands up if you believe yes. Is the health and safety executive fit for purpose? Hands up if you think yes. Is the CITB, CSCS, CPCS, Nocken, NDTG fit for purpose? Hands up if you say yes. Not good, is it? Not good at all. People, drive carefully today. I've already given you the heads up. I'm going to be talking about whole body vibration tomorrow, which, you know, if you've ever glanced through Anne Summers' catalogue, I'm sure you're thinking, whole body vibration, I'd pay extra for that. This is bad. Trust me, this is a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's a bad thing, and you need to be aware of it, particularly if you're spending any time on equipment, which I think most of you guys are. So be here tomorrow. Obviously, the show starts at 10. I'll probably get around to that around about 10:30. But until then, everybody, please have a good day. Oh, hang on a minute. Dan says, no chance. Not one of them are fit. Gary says, unfortunately, we've heard too many stories of the homeless guy in the street begging for money and then just jumping into his car and going home. I can't make that distinction. You know, if somebody has fallen on hard times, I don't want to be running a background check on them. I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and bung them a fiver. Yes, you might argue they might have a nice car park around the corner. They might be doing it purely as a job. Yes, I might be supporting a drug habit or an alcohol habit. But what I'm actually doing is seeing a fellow human who is, to my eyes, not doing well and doing a tiny bit to make them do slightly better. Andy says, I've got a fitness device for that. Have you really? There was a guy in London doing just that. He was jailed for fraud. He had a 600 grand house and a 150 grand car. But, you know, who is the biggest group of homeless people in the UK? Ex-military. Are you honestly going to look at an Army, Navy, Air Force veteran and think he's definitely up to no good, that fella? Or are you going to think he put his life on the line to defend this country and I've got a fiver in my pocket? I know where I sit. I'm not saying I'm right. I think in every system, weird tangent to go off. You look at the average football crowd. You know, we down at West Ham, we get about 80,000 people on a Saturday afternoon. On the rare occasions we play on a Saturday afternoon. In amongst that 80,000 people, there might be 100, 200, 250 who aren't there for the football. They're there to cause trouble, to have a fight with the opposing fans. But there are 79,750 good ones. Do I really need to modify my behaviour to suit the 250 who might be a problem? Or do I angle my behaviour, my compassion to the 79,750? I know which way I'm going. Andy says, got to go. Great show. Have a great one. All, thank you very much indeed. Have a great day. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I will do my level best. I'll be back tomorrow for yet more of the same. Until then, everybody, have a fine and splendid day. I'll see you on the morrow.